Hey, appreciate all of you for joining us today. It's cool that we're able to connect on Twitter and LinkedIn and all those other things, but it's also cool that we get the time to get together and just virtually meet each other, right? And talk shop, just nerd out together. And that's what this is for. I approach Xano and these guys because they have amazing product. Not and you'll learn more about that today, but in our Slack group, we've been talking about like what databases we want to use and all that kind of stuff, right? For a while, always thinking about how we can optimize our stack, right? Like me specifically, I work in the enterprise world where we're running 20 to 80 million workflows a month, right? And currently that's all native in Bubble, right? But then it's starting to get to that point of like, well, how can we make this faster, right? And that's what today is about, is how can we make it faster? We're not bashing any one company one way or the other. We're saying, how can we all work together to put together a stack that makes sense for us and our clients and continues to send no code into the enterprise world, right? And so I'm really excited to be putting on this call. I appreciate the guys at Xano for running all the tests that they did. I appreciate Eli and some of the other people that have helped us put together our bubble tests. I will say as a disclaimer, like, we try to run these tests as clean as possible, right? We use the same data set across the board. We, documented everything. We sent all of our documentation, all of our workflows, everything like that. We sent it all to Bubble for them to review. They never gave us any kind of official word back or anything. But with that being said, these are still tests, right? There's a lot of variables in these tests. So don't take these exactly for what it is, right? But this should be a good enough starting point to start these conversations and to start thinking about how we should be looking at tools like this in general going forward for your application. So without any further ado, I say we just get right into it.
Awesome. Well, JJ, thank you so much. And I think that you summed it up really well. I just think that one thing I want to echo is that I think we believe that, working together is better. We at Xano are certainly not at odds against Bubble. We have nothing but respect for them. We don't believe that no code would be where it is without Bubble. And so, we want to try to figure out a way to collaborate and work together. We're obviously a company that's 100% focused on the back end. And, Bubble has had to carry the no code world, not only handling the back end, but the front end, responsive design, and all of the things that are coming out that make like cutting edge applications. And so it's just hard to focus on everything. And so that's why, in that spirit, JJ approached us and said like, hey, is there a way that we can drive more exposure to how we can use different no code tools together? And that's why we decided to put this together, to run some performance tests and to kind of give all of you different insights. And so with that, I think maybe let me go ahead and share my screen. I'll drive the presentation. JJ, you can go ahead and start just with the intros. What I'd like to do is just start high level and just talk a little bit about the people kind of that you're seeing on the screen and in the room. JJ, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll move to Eli.
Yeah, so me, JJ, previous non-technical founder, didn't think I was smart enough to learn how to code. Eventually found Bubble about 2.5 years ago, taught myself Bubble using BuildCamp and Gregory John as a resource. And since then, you guys know I've just been an addict using Bubble all the time, wearing Bubble, supporting Bubble, everything's Bubble, right? And I love it. And so right now I'm currently leading a VC-backed startup. Their product and engineering teams. We're building a team of Bubble devs and really hitting that enterprise market really hard. I previously was working as a full-time Bubble dev at an SEO-based startup where we were also using Bubble and a team of Bubble devs and have a lot of experience building enterprise Bubble applications, specifically those that are crunching a lot of data. And I also am a teacher at BuildCamp and I do a lot of things, but thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Eli, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Prakash. Yeah, I'm Eli. I first discovered Bubble back in 2016. I was working in marketing at the time, and we needed to build some internal tools that we just couldn't find on the market. So ended up enjoying it so much that I quit and went full-time with Bubble in 2019. So yeah, that's pretty much my background. And currently I'm working with Kleercard, fintech that we're building out in no code as much as we can.
Cool.
Thanks for joining us, Eli.
Yeah, Eli, so great to have you here. And one of the things that I love is that, everyone that's kind of really deep into Bubble. You all are a community that really knows each other, and you've also been really welcoming to us because we're still relatively new on the scene, so we really appreciate that. Moving forward just into the agenda, I can talk about the agenda at a very high level, and then we can go on from there. So the introduction is kind of where we're at right now, just talking about the intention behind this event and really what we wanted to accomplish. We're going to spend a couple minutes talking about Xano. There's probably a lot of you that have used it before, but maybe you haven't. So we're going to talk about what that is. We're going to then dive into why you should use a separate backend alongside your Bubble application and some of the benefits that you get out of there. And then, as JJ mentioned, I'll pass it over to him. We're going to review some performance data. As he mentioned, we kind of took a data set in an instance with like 100,000 records, which he'll go through, and he'll go through the different tests that we ran. And then I'll pass it to Michael on the team, and he's going to go over some very common use cases that, or actually this example use case, that's Eli. He's going to talk about his experience at Kleercard. Then Michael is going to take the mic, and he's going to talk about common use cases where bubblers and Xanos where bubblers use the Xano platform to get things done, especially with bulk record image transformation, things of that nature. And then we'll do Q&A and maybe even some basic demos. But that's broadly where it's going to go. So let me go ahead and dive right in and get started. JJ, Eli, unless you have anything else.
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. And again, thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. You know, we're like I mentioned, the recording will be made available, but would love for you to stick around and participate in some of the QA. We want to make sure to get your questions answered. I think there's like a question button that you can hit, and you can ask your questions. We'll be monitoring those questions, and we'll make sure to get them all answered at the end of this. So before I get started, very, very quickly, just introducing myself. My name is Prakash. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Xano. With us on this call is Mr. Michael Udinsky. He leads our customer success. Mr. Christopher Coleman, and he is on the customer success team. Javier, which I hadn't seen before, he might be here now, but I'll bring him on if he is. And he is our testing engineer. And I also see in the chat, there's Jack Antikajian. He is also our co-founder and COO. So the reason I wanted to mention this is a really important event for us. We're all here. We're all here representing, and we're very excited that you have all joined us today. So in terms of what Xano is, we'd like to say that we're the fastest way to build a powerful, scalable backend for any application without code. And I think most of you understand how this works, but we always like to say there's two pieces to any piece of software, right? You have the front end, which is what the user sees, and that's what you're building in Bubble. And then you have the back end, which is all the business logic behind the scenes. Now, Bubble also has a back end, but we at Xano are 100% focused on the back end. And so when we say back end, we're the entire back end. We're a scalable managed server. We're a flexible database and a no-code API builder. Michael will go into details around what this means a little later on, but I just wanted to give you a high-level primer there. So let's go into just why you might want to use a separate no-code backend like Xano alongside Bubble. So there's a couple different reasons for this, and I'll go one by one. So the first is that Xano, or separate backend, can integrate with APIs and services from anywhere, transform data, put it in one central place, and then push it out to many front ends. So you might be building a web application in Bubble, and Bubble is amazing for that. A lot of you do that on this call. But you might also build a native mobile app in something else, whether that be a no-code tool or in code, you might have that there. And then you might have like a sales dashboard and a reporting dashboard. So you might have like 4 or 5 or 6 different front ends, and you need a central, powerful backend to basically pipe data in the format that the front ends want to each one of those front ends. So that's a first and really important point of why it's so important to have a separate backend. The second thing is just code development. For those of you that are building very far in Bubble, you know that there's backend workflows and front-end workflows. And if you're working with the team, it's actually really hard to work together. So we've heard from a lot of Bubblers that one thing about that's nice about using Bubble and Xano together is that Bubble, you can focus on the front-end workflows, and Xano, that person can focus on all of the business logic behind the scenes and just pipe up the data that is necessary to the Bubble application. The third thing is that we are 100% focused on the backend, and we're built for large data sets and scale. So what does that mean? The adage today, and I don't have to tell all of you, is that no code can't scale, right? But if you think about that, there's basically, you peel that argument back, there are 2 points to that. One is compute, right? Like, can you handle the capacity of an enterprise application, just like JJ was mentioning? The second piece is the business logic. Can you do really everything that a programming language can? So the reason why you might want to pair a tool like Xano alongside Bubble is because we are addressing those 2 things head on. So first of all, from infrastructure, we are on Google Cloud. So we're the same thing. Like if you were building from code and using a traditional development stack, we're hosted on the same cloud service. In fact, our CTO and co-founder, Sean, he was the lead DevOps on Google Photos. It started with the server on his desk and set the underpinning for what powers the service today. So that is in our DNA, right? We use Docker to provision your instance, Kubernetes to orchestrate as you scale, and the world's most flexible database, which you can scale horizontally and vertically. If you don't know what that means, all you need to know is it's world-class, enterprise-grade infrastructure, and every time you use a paid Xano account, you are getting that single-tenant dedicated infrastructure to build on. Because of all of this, we're able to offer world-class compliance and security. We go through rigorous audits, so we can give you things like GDPR compliance. You can deploy your servers in Germany. We give you HIPAA compliance, ISO 27001, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of people have heard of SOC 2 compliance. ISO 27001 is the big brother or sister to SOC 2. There's a lot more controls and audits that you have to go through in order to get that certification. So whether you're building a fintech application or a medical grade application, or you need your data very confidentially stored in a certain region, that is what the benefit of a dedicated backend that can be deployed regionally can give you. So I'm going to move on now to JJ just to talk broadly about performance, some of the tests that we ran. And JJ, we'll start at this screen. You can talk about it at a high level, and then we'll get to the stats on the next screen. So go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, and Eli, feel free to intervene at any time along with me. So the goal here was, how are we comparing the two with large data sets? Well, from small to large data sets, right? And so we provided a very sample set of information. It was just 100,000 items, country, items, order dates, nothing huge, right? And we used this data, we uploaded it into our Bubble application, and then we also sent the data to Xano. And we ran the tests, similar tests to do similar things with the same data to see how it would compare in each instance. So we can go on to the next slide. So what we found is that there are points where Bubble performs better, right? And then there are points where Xano performs better. So a simple thing like getting 100 records, for example, from like a repeating group, Bubble comes in at 220 milliseconds, really, really quick, right? And actually quicker than Xano at 300 milliseconds, right? So, getting 100 items or less, still Bubble is that, really quick, awesome option for you. When we're talking about, I guess, let me take a step back for a second. This data at large, the Xano data is an average of their 3 paid plans. Okay, so they're launch, scale, and scale X2 plans, right? The Bubble data is a little bit less. It's more of a personal professional plan mix. We didn't get to use, for the most part, productions or dedicated plans. So there could probably be a little bit more oomph added to that as well. So that would be getting 100 records within Bubble, within Xano. It's clocking in at around 220 milliseconds.
And before you move on, JJ, one thing that I want to mention is most, so as you know, when you're using the Bubble's API to grab data, you're limited to 100 records. You basically do paging to get more. And for most people, actually, that's 100, that's fine. Like, when are you ever displaying more than 100 records on the screen? And so because they have that direct data, they're the all-in-one application, they have a direct connection to the database, they can get that very quick, much quicker than we can. So I think that, and we'll cover this in a little bit, but if you're building something that has a low data set, or it's only displaying, 50 to 100 items on the screen, there's not really any major transformations happening, Bubble is going to be a faster tool for you, right? So even though there's just that one line item there, that one line item, it fetches it very quickly. And just for those of you that don't know about timing, millisecond is 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second, right? So when we say like 200 milliseconds, that's like a quarter of a second. So, you're not going to notice. It goes very, very quick. So just in terms of saying what Bubble is very good at, it's these data sets. You're not displaying more than 100 data on the screen. There's no intensive background processing. Bubble does amazing at. So JJ, let me pass it back to you.
Cool. Moving on to the next one, the search and transform. This is where we searched 100,000 records and we constrained it with the country of Tanzania, looking for that. And we were also, was this an update or a constraint on the type fruit?
It was an update. So,
okay,
so we were search and transform, yeah.
Search and transform. So we were searching for it and then updating that information, right? And with 100,000 records. And we saw that take place in about 400 milliseconds with Xano compared to about 7 seconds with Bubble, right? So once we get up to that 100,000 record mark and we're actually making, searches and transforming, we're starting to see a noticeably faster increase with Xano at that level. Bulk delete, this is one of the things where, it's quite easy to create data within Bubble, but it's harder and slower to delete things within Bubble, ironically. And so just a simple bulk delete, with Xano is around 4 seconds for 500 records. And if we were going to do like a recursive workflow to bulk delete about 500 records within Bubble, we saw coming in around 54 seconds. So noticeably faster there. Eli, you want to jump in at any point?
I think real quick, so Eli is going to cover his personal use case on the next slide, but Eli, if you want to talk broadly about the performance, then please feel free.
Yeah.
No, I think it's important to mention that these recursive workflows were set up in a very specific way. Like a lot of what happens with Bubble as well, you can see much worse performance depending on how those workflows are set up. And that's probably a different conversation. But you might not see these exact same times you jump into your backend, depending on how those recursive workflows are set up to create and update.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables at play. You can't just take this black and white, right? Like there's a lot of things that we could do to modify this one way or the other. But that being said, we gave it our best go and the cleanest way to, get the cleanest data back.
Right.
Let's moving on to create. This is something that I have faced head on previously building an SEO application where maybe we needed to create 10 to 20,000 records like that, right? And Bubble has 2 different ways that you can create. We can create using a recursive workflow, right? Which we're all used to, just keep running until it's created everything that we needed to run. And then we can also use the data API, which allows us to send chunks of 1,000 records, and it will create those 1,000 records, and it will take 20 seconds to create each 1,000 records. And so within a recursive workflow, you can keep sending chunks of 1,000 records, hitting the data API to really expedite the data creation, right? But that's also quite hard because you need to have a really good handle on the data you're sending and to make sure that the chunks you're sending are accurate, right? With that being said, creating 1,000 records with Xano is about 300 milliseconds. With Bubble, using the data API is 20 seconds. And then in Bubble, using the workflows like recursive is about 5 minutes. All right. And this kind of just keeps going on from there. Once we get up to 10,000 records, it's about 510 milliseconds or half a second compared to the data API, which is about 3 minutes. And then recursive workflows, which comes in around 40 minutes. And then finally, I don't know when you'll need to create 100,000 records like this, but if you needed to, Xano offers it at 4 seconds, and 4.11 seconds. Data API comes in around 30 minutes, and then the workflows, recursive and Bubble comes in around 4 hours. So creating 100,000 records is where it gets kind of crazy, right? Like when you need to get up to that level, it's probably most advantageous to you to look towards alternate solutions that kind of give you a faster response. Right. And maybe you don't need a faster response. Maybe you can create 100,000 records in the background and you don't need to serve that data to your customer right away. So maybe the need to move isn't immediate, but think about it in a scalability standpoint, right? Like if you keep stacking those 100,000 crates, in a scheduler in the back end, even though you don't need it right away, that will stack up over time. So if you can do it in 4 seconds compared to 4 hours, it's highly advantageous in many, many different ways.
Yeah, and JJ, could you explain broadly, I saw a question come in, the difference between the data API and the workflow API, just at a high level so people can understand?
Eli might be better for that one. Eli, you want to take it?
Yeah, so the data API is the API that Bubble exposes automatically, right? So when you create a data type in Bubble, there's an API endpoint that is exposed that you can hit directly. So if you go into your settings in your API tab, you'll see there's both a workflow and a data API endpoint. Additionally, there is a bulk create endpoint where you can send up to, I think it's 1,000 items at once. So in one call, you send 1,000 items and Bubble will create all those. It doesn't require any looping through it. They'll just create them all at once.
Take 20 seconds.
And that's really what we're looking at here between the data API and the workflow. The workflow is going through recursively and creating them one by one. The data API is creating them in chunks of 1,000.
Right. And before we get to Eli, your use case, I think it's worth noting that, I mean, you can see if you are, again, I'll reiterate, building something that isn't going to require a lot of transformation, that you're just displaying data very quickly. And to be honest, this is most applications. You should just stick in Bubble, like honestly, and we genuinely mean this. I think what we do want to highlight, though, is there is the case where you are starting to push the performance of transformations, bulk deleting records, bulk adding records, doing these things called background tasks, things in the background, where this is something that we have focused on, right? Since before we even launched in January of 21, we've been working on it for years. So I think you're going to see improvements on the Bubble side. But for right now, you can use a tool like Xano to supercharge your Bubble application, right? It's not like there's a way that we can work together and to get these types of performances. So we just wanted, one thing that I think JJ highlighted when he approached us, which is important, is like, well, like there's this general sense that Xano is faster or more scalable, but what does that mean? Like, let's put some numbers to it. Let's actually try to give some transparency. And so we did run these tests, and at a very high level, these tests were done multiple times per request. We're using Load4j, using Postman, like all industry standard API endpoint testing. And so that's the way we perform these. So I'm gonna move forward and give Eli the floor a little bit, just to talk a little bit, because he's in this hybrid world, right, where he is using Bubble and he's using Xano at the same time. So Eli, I'd love for you to kind of talk at a high level about your use case when you came to the decision to kind of work in this hybrid world. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, for sure. And that is, I think it's really important. I think it's really important clarification there that it's not either Bubble or Xano. There's a very, very real use case. I think a lot of use cases where a hybrid approach works. So we got started with Xano. I think, and I'll just kind of back up how I got introduced to Xano. It was actually early 2021. I think Neil might have tweeted about it. And so I went and started playing around with it, and I had some of the same questions, right? Like, and I hear the questions when I'm consulting with Bubble Devs now, like, why do I need a separate backend? Like, what can I do in Xano that I can't do in Bubble? Or do I have to migrate my entire database over? And the other thing I was dealing with is like, I think most no-code developers, I'm a very naturally very curious person, and it's very easy for me to get bored, jump to the next shiny thing, and so I'm super aware of that tendency, and I had pushed back against it. Like, I'd chosen Bubble as my tool. I'm going to master this tool. Like, I'm not going anywhere else. I'm going to stay here until I master Bubble. But there was this something with Xano, it just kind of intrigued me. And when I was working as contract with Kleercard before I'd come on full time, we had a small app that needed to be built, and it was kind of in a partnership with the main application, but it was going to require quite a bit more data, more aggregations, more data manipulation, and it's something we could have built. We could have built it in Bubble, but we decided to build the front end in Bubble and use Xano to build the back end, because these things had to be done daily. And it just worked. It worked really well. And so we started using it and started pulling some of the functionality into the main application and using it for, as we would hit complex data needs or like critical workflows, we would start moving them into Xano as we could. And Xano's become an integral tool with us as a primarily Bubble application. Xano is a critical tool in that stack. And just as kind of an example, we had a recursive workflow that was running every 60 seconds, like critical to what we do. And we just struggled with it randomly failing. It was hard to know when it would fail, when it wouldn't run. And so we just moved that particular task over into Xano, set it up on a scheduled job in Xano, still ran the same actions, right? And I think this is important because one of the fantastic things in a partnership between Xano and Bubble is that it's so easy to pull the data out of Bubble into Xano and turn around and push Bubble or data back into Bubble or trigger workflows back in Bubble. And so from both sides, that the functionality that's needed to do that has been exposed and made it very easy to, especially with recursive workflows. Honestly, I don't really set up recursive workflows in Bubble anymore. I'll pull those into Xano. I use it as our business logic a lot. So I'll pull that into Xano, pull the data that I need to process and run back through. And then oftentimes we're running the workflows that we were running in Bubble. Like those endpoints are still there. We're running the same workflows, the same actions. We're just controlling how they're triggered from Xano. And the reason is that we have so much more control and insight, right, into what's happening. With a recursive workflow, it's very difficult to kind of follow the process, what's happening. Did everything go through? Did everything fire off? Did we process half of what we were going to process? And so I really, from my side, I see Xano as a critical hybrid tool for us, in particular on the functionality, functions and the workflows that we can set up. But then the other part is you've got webhooks, right? So webhooks you can catch in Bubble, but it can be difficult because you have to initialize them. You can't work directly with JSON, and so we're moving, pretty much any kind of a webhook where we're listening for third-party events. All that's getting moved into Xano, where we can catch it, we can track the events, we can see exactly where we're at, we can process the actual data that we receive, only send to Bubble the data that we need, and it gives us better insight into what's happening with those webhooks, but it also makes it easier than developing on the Bubble side because we're not having to process that data like we used to.
Awesome. And Eli, just to get a sense, and by the way, love that these questions are coming in the question area. If you have more, please ask them. We will make sure to get to all of them. Eli, just a broad question around the data set that you're working with. At what point, did you notice slowness? Was it when you hit a certain record count that you were like, oh, I think it makes sense to do this, or were you just proactive about it?
Honestly, we were proactive about it.
Okay.
And part of that was that initial smaller app that just, I think my curiosity wanted to see how this works, right? And so we set it up that way using Xano as a backend. The Bubble, honestly, for most of what we need works well, but it really comes down to, and I think different applications are going to run into different needs. Some will have much greater data sets than what we're working with. But for us, we hadn't really run into a slowness issue that was impacting us on a big scale. We just started moving what we needed to as it came up. And so that's kind of, when we start looking at new functionality, it's like, okay, are we gonna build this in Bubble? We're gonna build this in Xano, or we're gonna build some kind of a hybrid approach here.
Eli, have you built something in Bubble and then we're like, shoot, this would just perform way better in Xano, and just rebuilt it in Xano?
Yes.
And how was that for you? Was that a difficult transformation? Was it worth your time, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I've been working in Xano long enough now that it's a lot less of an issue to do that. But I try to keep as much of the workflows and actions as I can in Bubble. So if I'm going to move or transform a way that we're processing data, or the way we're doing a specific action, or I'm going to try to keep those actions and move them into an endpoint that I can trigger from Xano as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how you can think about doing this hybrid approach, because I think that is the best approach. If you are thinking about using Xano alongside Bubble, or any backend for that matter, we'll kind of walk you through the different ways to start thinking about it. Just moving forward a little bit, Eli, thank you so much. Oh, did you want to share one more?
Yeah, if I can just say one more thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is, you may not run into this, but there's a use case also for Xano, because it's hard to protect data in the editor in Bubble, right? Especially start having 4, 5, 6 collaborators that are working in Bubble. That data is exposed to anyone essentially that's working in that editor, unless you just really restrict their permissions where they can't really do anything, which is not normally where you're at. Normally it's developers that you need to be working. Xano works great as a separate backend where you can push sensitive data that only specified people on your team have access to, so that it's not exposed directly in the database on Bubble Web.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, the data encryption, especially for compliance, which we'll talk about a little bit. I see some questions that are around that, is very important, and a good use case to kind of use us both together. I'm going to move forward, and Michael is going to pick up from here and just talk about some common use cases where bubblers are using Xano together, and some of the problems that they're solving. Because sometimes if everything is working fine for you in Bubble, amazing. Like we've said many times, like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But there are going to be times that you're going to see these common use cases come up that you might be like, I might run into that in the future. We've also started building a Notion page. It's very early, but we basically started putting videos that our team has done to basically help you understand some of these concepts, and in some of the cases, just how to understand them in Bubble. We're certainly not Bubble experts, but we do get into the Bubble product, show you how to connect things together. So that is the link there, go.xano.co/bubble-xano, and we will be updating that as the week moves forward. But Michael, I'm going to hand it to you to talk about some of the more common use cases that we see bubblers do with Xano.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here on your Saturday. It's awesome to see such a great turnout. So let's dive into some of these different use cases. So one is fuzzy search. So what exactly is fuzzy search? So think of it as it allows you to run a search similar to sort of what Google does. You can do things like negation, use quotes to find specific phrases, finding similar words to your search or tenses, like think about party versus parties, right? So you get more similar results faster. So we know Bubble has a third-party plugin for fuzzy search, but let's say, for
It
example,
happens on the client side though.
it happens on the client side. Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, so for example, Xano processes all that in the backend in a performant way. You can build a performance search index to handle this. And let's say we need to search across 50,000 movies in our database, right? But we care about title and description, but we care about title more. In Xano, we can rank these results by title first, description second. So then if we search for something like Toy Story Buzz, we can see our results for Toy Story at the top. And yeah, I think we can move to the next one. Yep. And so aggregation. So aggregation is when you need to basically combine all those individual pieces of records or data in your database to have something that you can look at that's insightful and meaningful, right? So it's often, aggregation is often used to generate reports. So let's say you need to generate a daily report across 1 million sales transactions. So with Xano, our aggregate engine allows you to group things so you can do stuff like a daily, monthly, or quarterly revenue report. You're able to find averages like average customer spend or who your most frequent customer is. And if you need this on a daily cadence, you can also implement caching, right? So you can run all these reports, cache it, and then at 8 a.m., it's ready to go when you're ready to go ahead and review your daily reports.
Awesome. And just for those of you that don't know caching, it's basically storing the results in memory. So a lot of times when you're doing these complex processes, obviously they're going to take a long time, whether they're using Xano or Bubble. They could take all night to generate, but you don't need that report to be regenerated over and over and over. So just store the results in memory and serve it up to you. And then, a lot of people use Xano for caching these massive operations and then serving it up to the user. And then you can specify, you're like, recalculate it every 24 hours. So this is great for daily reports, recalculate it every 3 months. So that endpoint is just instant every single time you access the data.
Yeah, and Bubble just released some kind of caching functionality, but I think it's just a 30-second window, a 30-minute window. And it's not, and you can't really set it up in that manner, right? So it's nice to see Bubble's getting there with caching, but not in this kind of manner.
But that's great to know, because that means that if you're doing something, let's say you have some traffic and there's a lot of customers viewing the same data over and over, within that 30 minutes, if it's cached, they're going to get it very, very quickly instead of loading, taxing the database.
Yeah, it was a nice addition.
Awesome. So moving on to advanced querying, right? So with Xano, we can get very specific with our querying. Especially across large data sets, if you need to use things like OR groups. So we can get our data exactly as we want. So for example, if I need to look up users who are in Tanzania or New Zealand and have purchased cereal or vegetables, we can build those different groupings or statements and statements in Xano in order to query our data exactly as we need it.
Guys, can you imagine doing that in Bubble? Yeah, what that expression would look like. Sorry, Michael, go for it.
No, it's all good. Always appreciate the input. So, and it doesn't stop there with Xano. We have a lot of other great querying features. You can implement things like joins. We have a feature called add-ons that allows you to decorate your query with related data. So can really get into some advanced stuff there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
someone
Eli,
was asking.
Sorry,
No,
Eli,
actually,
you can't even do something like that in Bubble, but you might be able to find a hack like solution to it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can use arbitrary text and create it, but it's a process.
Yeah. So no shade, really. Just that is a clear, like, if you need to get into that, it's like, you know, it would be really difficult to do that in Bubble if for that use case.
Awesome.
Awesome.
And yeah, just to kind of reiterate the intention for those of you that are new, it's like this was actually something that we talked about a lot. Like, how do we come across to where it's not like us versus Bubble, but more of like we've focused on solving these problems in the back end much more than Bubble has, because guess what? We don't have to worry about the front end at all. You know, we don't have to worry about the new responsive canvas that they just published out to you that probably took so long to build, or all of these other components. So this is why it's like we want to work very closely with them. And it's just the reality of kind of where things are right now. And Bubble's constantly improving. They're improving things for you on the front end, the responsiveness, and the back end. So they have a lot of different fronts that they're being attacked from. And so this way it unblocks all of us. This is why no coders and no code tools working together can really be a net positive for all of us that are just trying to get our ideas into the world, no matter how big they become. So let's move on to the next one, working with external APIs. Go for it, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about Xano is you can connect to any external API. And oftentimes when you start building your application, you'll find out that you need to work with these third-party APIs for various different services. However, sometimes these external APIs are not in the exact format you want it. With Xano, you're able to transform them, either the data or the way you call them, to use it exactly how you may need to for your application. And this is kind of a fun example, but there is a Star Wars API where you can look up different planets from the different Star Wars movies, right? And how you call that API, if you want to get an individual planet, is with the planet ID. But who's going to know the planet ID in this one Star Wars database, right? So with Xano, what you can do is you can manipulate that API call. So you're actually looking up that planet by its name, which people will actually know how to look that up. And so you can set all that up and push that to your Bubble front end. So you are having a input field where it's the planet name and you're getting your planet results back. If there's data in there, you need to perform calculations or transform. Xano can handle all that in the back end and then present it into your Bubble front end.
Yeah, so this is an important point that Michael's making here that people don't necessarily realize. You know, by the way, I put in the Star Wars API. He's talking about, we have a video on how to do this and actually display it in Bubble. But when you're working with an awesome API like a Star Wars Planet Finder, it's great. And in this Star Wars API, they've got planets, they've got people, they have all sorts of information. But you know, when you search for a planet, you have to know the ID. Tatooine is obviously ID 1, but you know, as you go to Dagobah and these other planets, like you can't expect people in their app to like know the ID. So how do you make it to where they can type in Tatooine and then get all the results back, and they don't have to worry about IDs or anything? This is where Xano really shines. And Eli mentioned this a little bit earlier about the webhook piece of it. When you receive data from an external service, it's not going to be perfect. Okay, they don't format it perfectly, so your Bubble app can read it in a repeating list. So you got to transform it in Bubble, and then you load it into the Bubble front end. And this is where we can work really well together. We're built for these transformations. You can transform the data. You can make this Star Wars Planet Finder work, and then you can leverage it in Bubble. So for this, thank you so much, Michael. Was there anything you wanted to add, Michael?
No, that covered it. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. And this is kind of the last portion, and then we'll kind of get into the live Q&A here in a second. But we wanted to just talk broadly, and I think all of us can kind of chime in on our own experience here around like how you can think about using Xano and Bubble together. And there's like at a high level like 3 different camps that we've seen. So the first is like, and actually the most prevalent is like, I'm starting fresh. I'm like just starting my application. I want to use Bubble as my front end, but I also am going to build something scalable. So I want to use Xano in the back end. It's actually very quick to get started because you are starting fresh with Bubble, a Bubble instance, and you're starting fresh with Xano. All you really need to do is connect the two together. you can connect via the API connector, which you can see in their marketplace, and then you set up authentication. And if you go to that link that we shared, that go.xano.co/bubble-xano, we have videos on how to do this, right? So you can set up authentication, you can set up your first API endpoint to read from the Xano database and then display it in a list. Now, I know that there's nuances around repeating lists and having it update live. Eli's done some great videos around solving this problem, but it's possible to do it once you know how that's done. Second is this hybrid approach. This will by far and away be the thing we recommend most. You're already working with Bubble. You're happy with Bubble. And there's just like maybe 1 or 2 workflows that are a little slow for you, right? So that might be search. That might be like a calculation that you're doing. You know, we recommend just taking that workflow, recreating it in Xano, and then connecting that data once it's processed in Xano up to Bubble. This way, when the user's, for example, doing fuzzy search or they're doing any sort of intensive calculation, you're not putting that load on Bubble. You're doing it on Xano, and we're meant to kind of process these heavier loads. We like to say depend. Yeah, go for it, JJ.
Sorry. Just to get on that example, my last company, we had a workflow that had more than 250 steps in it and took more than 3 days to complete. The entire workflow took more than 3 days to complete, right? And so we had 5 million records in our database, and we'd go through each record, run API calls, check to see if that data was updated, and if not, update it, and then if so, move on to the next one, right? That was just like one specific engine that we had all natively in Bubble, and it worked, right? But it took many days to complete. Everything else was great. We were loading repeating groups with 200, 300, 400,000 results very quickly, all natively within Bubble. But that engine is a perfect example of, let's put that on Xano and then feed all the rest of that data back into a Bubble app and stay the rest native, right? And so that would be a perfect use case in my mind of how I would think about using Xano.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, it really depends on the workflow. Like, so, you know, JJ had to replicate or has to replicate a 250 step workflow. I don't think everyone has that type of complexity. So, you know, depending on the complexity, you could do it in a day. You could also take a week. You could maybe take a month if you're slow and don't have a lot of time and have kids. And I'm definitely in that camp. So it really depends. But we always recommend take one workflow at a time. Your slowest one, start there, and then just port that over. And then the third camp, which is we see the least of, but we have people that are like, look, I have many front ends that I want to serve to, not just Bubble. I want to do an entire swap. It's basically doing the same thing you would do in your hybrid approach, where you would basically take one workflow at a time and then slowly migrate the data over to Xano. And we have videos on how to do this. The CSV or Bubble has an export your things to CSV. We can bring it into Xano. We can show you how to think about relationships and things of that nature. This can take a month or more. So it just depends where you are in your project lifecycle. Like I said, at Xano, we always recommend good hygiene is to have a separate backend. Why? Because as your company grows, that data, that mission critical data needs to be stored in a separate place and served out to many different front ends. But that being said, Bubble is an amazing tool. And if you're starting, you don't have crazy mission critical things you have to do, just keep it all in one place, stay on Bubble. But if not, try this hybrid world, the world that Eli was talking about, right? He uses it where he's using a Bubble first application. Everything is served in Bubble, and then let Xano do the heavy lifting. JJ or Eli, anything to add regarding how people can be thinking about using Xano and Bubble together and like timing around, or maybe how they would approach doing that?
Just to tie the hybrid approach back to the caching as that Michael was talking about, that can be a very useful approach. We use it a little bit, but where you actually use Xano, you set up an API endpoint for pulling a specific report, right? And you use Xano's logic to actually extract the data out of your Bubble database. Your data can still exist in your Bubble database, no need to migrate it, but you can create those reports in Xano. And then when your users are downloading those reports, you just pull them by ID, right? And so just kind of another use case in that hybrid state where you can use the caching on the API endpoint to generate your own reports from your Bubble database, but do it all inside Xano.
Awesome. JJ, anything else from you regarding this approach?
Like the way I'm starting to think about things is whenever I'm dealing with records like 5,000 or more, where I need to create, find, delete, modify, transform, I'm thinking mostly will make sense to build that in Xano. The rest I'm still thinking of just keeping in Bubble at this time, right? And there's not often many times where I need to do, that type of creation or transforming or deletion, but there are definitely those times, right? And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it going forward. I'm also thinking about all of my activity, all of my, user stats, all of those logs, like a backend situation. I think that would make sense in Xano. And then also one of the things that I started to see in my last application is we had a dedicated app with Bubble and we pushed it really high in terms of capacity. And we were still, because again, we were transforming so much, we were doing 20 million workflows a month, we were still up against capacity. And the thing that I kept telling the team was, we need to diversify our load, right? If we have a single point of failure right now, right? And if this goes down, everything goes down. But if we're able to diversify and maybe remove this engine from Bubble app, put it onto Xano, then we have two instances that we can push all the way, because we're already almost at the max, or seemingly the max of one, and we haven't even gone live yet, So the fact of diversification, load balancing, and just de-risking your stack is really smart, adding redundancies along the way. Once you get to that enterprise level, you really need to think about things like that. And so I think that's another value add-on for adding something like this into your stack.
And you're mentioning the logs there, JJ. That is a use case that we do use that I failed to mention, but just creating snapshots of specific data from your Bubble app on a daily basis, so that you can pull reports on like, where was this specific user, what was the state of this particular data type on June 15th, right? It works really, really well just to manage that, create those that piece of data in Xano. It doesn't clutter up your Bubble app, and it's easily accessible to pull your reports and everything.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. So kind of moving forward, we're at the end. I think the one thing that we wanted to say as a team is we really appreciate all of you being here. Us at Xano, we wanted to offer 10% off for life for anyone that came here. So we're going to apply this code to all of the email addresses that registered for the event. So you don't even have to do anything. If you already happen to be a paying Xano customer, then you just have to go to your billing and kind of update it, and you'll see it, update it, and then it's going to take this into effect and reset your billing cycle. So you should be good to go there. But we really appreciate you taking the time. The tutorials I mentioned, again, we're still working on that page, but we're going to be adding to it throughout the week. There's all of our Twitter handles. And then I think now we can probably move into our Q&A session and kind of start answering things live. Before we do that, JJ, is there anything that you wanted to say just as we get into this session?
Yeah, I think I just like to thank you all for joining us. We've had over 350 people register for this event, which is really exciting, right? Like, in the no-code world, this community is evolving. We're all learning together, right? Like, I started this Slack group 2 years ago because I just wanted to learn with people. I wanted to talk about things with people. My wife got sick of hearing about Bubble, right? And so that's how we've all kind of grown together. And Twitter too has become that resource to me. So these opportunities where we're able to come together, I appreciate you guys, joining us. And we put this together for an educational purpose. We want to give you and each of us the knowledge of, when we're thinking through things like this for potential clients, potential builds, like, what is the best stack, right? Like, we don't need to be a purist. Like, we need to build the best no-code applications, because that's going to help us all, right? And so that's kind of where I'm thinking right now is, I'm building enterprise applications. I want to see no code go far. What is that? Still figuring out. We're still learning. Technology changes every single day. You need to be able to adapt, quickly learn new tools, which you have because you've already learned Bubble, right? And stay at that forefront. And that's kind of, why we're doing this all. So this is not a bash on Bubble. This is not a bash on anything else. This is, just in the spirit of how can we all grow together. So thank you for joining us. Also, thank you for Eli. Like, the dude is a legend. He has so much experience with Bubble and Xano together. I don't have that much experience yet. So I really appreciate him joining us on this. And for the Xano team for supporting it all, organizing it all, putting together the call, doing all the work so I could, really bring this together for all of you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Eli, I'll pass it to you for any final words before we get into Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just echo what JJ said. Thanks to you guys. And I think that's really important when I look at tools that I want to add to my stack or potentially add. Honestly, I'm always looking for people who are listening to the users and who are adjusting, and you can see that. I've seen that in the last year with Xano, just updates and listening to users and making changes and adding features. And so I think that's an important thing to watch for when you're looking at adding a tool to your stack. But yeah, thanks for you guys for putting this together, and yeah, thanks everyone for showing up. I love this community, and this is just a good time.
Yeah, just to kind of echo that from our side too. We have seen or we've kind of Eli has been an early advocate of ours, and so it's been great kind of just having this come together. And I'd personally seen JJ a lot on Twitter, and so it was very cool when he reached out. I felt I was a little celebrity reaching out to me, and it was great because I know that he is very influential in the Bubble world. And the reason why this was so exciting for us is because we always say you'll remember this like Bubble pricing thing that I'm sure everyone on this call knows that what happened like 6 months ago. But Bubble really listened to the feedback, and there was a lot of kind of people are like, oh my gosh, and that's where we got a lot of attention. However, our posture was always like, look, Bubble's amazing. Let's figure out a way to work together. And JJ approached us in that spirit. We were looking for someone to amplify that voice that we had, and we didn't really have that notoriety in the Bubble community. And I thank you, JJ, for allowing us to leverage your platform to do that. And Eli, again, as someone that uses both tools, thank you for allowing us to do this. Okay, so with that said, we've got about 30 minutes left for Q&A. So I'm just going to go through the open ones just chronologically. I'm also, if we have time, going to go through the answered ones and basically just kind of highlight things that that maybe I think are worth for the rest of the room to hear. So we're going to start with the first one. So the first one is from AH. This is saying that for those who are interested in Xano for GDPR HIPAA, but they don't need the large data processing, so Bubble's faster for them. So where should they stand to get that faster processing in Bubble, but getting compliance at the same time? So I think what I'll do, let me start with an answer, and then anyone else can hop in here. As of right now, and it kind of depends on whether you want GDPR or HIPAA, the way to guarantee that in Bubble, as far as I know, is to get a dedicated plan. Now, those dedicated plans they put you in your own cluster, and they start at $1,500. So it is expensive. And why is this the case? Well, HIPAA and GDPR are very strict requirements around where the data is stored, how it is stored, and how it is transmitted. And so you need a dedicated resource that can meet all of those compliance measures. So unfortunately, the cheapest, most accessible way to do that is to use Xano alongside Bubble, unless you want to pay for a dedicated Bubble resource. So every single one of our plans start at or are dedicated. Every single one of our paid plans, our free plan is on a shared resource. Every paid plan is on a shared one. If you want to go for HIPAA compliance, for example, you can go ahead and you can do that as an add-on to any one of our paid plans. GDPR, just by the virtue sometimes of just storing your data in Germany, I mean, you can just be HIPAA or GDPR compliant just for our $67 a month plan. So that's kind of how I would answer that question. I wish there was a better answer for you there, AH, but that's kind of the way that things are. Any other comment or feedback before I move on to the next question? Okay.
With HIPAA compliant, isn't it true though that if any part of your stack is not HIPAA compliant, then you're not actually HIPAA compliant at all?
That's correct. You have to have attestations or BAAs that are signed from your vendors saying that they are in compliance with the HIPAA laws and regulation. So I'm not sure where Bubble stands on. Last I heard, they were not doing BAAs, but I'm not 100% positive. JJ or Eli, you may know better than us, or maybe someone in the community can say this. Okay, so
As I understand it, they aren't doing the BAAs.
Yeah.
Okay. So Greg asks, is it possible to get ISO 27001 and HIPAA certified when you have Bubble as a front end? So absolutely, because most of the compliance hurdles happen in the business processes, how you handle the data. Now, there is one very important thing that I'm going to bring up here. The way that data is transmitted matters. And right now, Bubble proxies all of the API endpoints from any external service. So whether it be Xano or any other API you're connecting to, if you're using their API connector, this means instead of going right from Xano servers to your front end, it passes through Bubble first, and then it gets sent to your user's front end. Now, the reason they do it is for security. They also want to monitor the traffic, make sure that they can control the external APIs coming in, which is great, but there's two things that happen. One, you lose a little bit of speed. Whenever you send something to, like, for example, let's say you're building something in Germany and Bubble servers are in the US. If you have to send requests to the US to get processed to then send it back to Germany, that obviously slows things down. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is around compliance. When you have a third party that you're passing data through that is not compliant, right? That means that technically they could sniff sensitive information and you lose your compliance there. So the answer, Greg, is that you can be compliant. However, you have to, in JavaScript, do the call so it hits Xano's server directly. This kind of goes into a question Neil's asking about our SDK. The Xano team does plan on building an SDK directly for Bubble that passes data directly to our servers, right? Like, so you don't have to worry about any of this. That will be coming probably in the next quarter. But as of today, if you want to achieve ISO 27001 and HIPAA compliance, it is possible with Xano. Just make sure that that data is being passed directly to our servers and not via the API connector. Okay, so next question. Can I implement a VPN tunnel to Xano? We have a fintech client and we'll need to send transactions through a VPN eventually. Yes, this is possible, but you have to be on one of our dedicated enterprise plans. That's what we allow VPNs for, and they started at $1,000. And so that's still, like, if you look at all the server stacks and the time it would take to set something like that up, that's still relatively cheap. But that being said, that's what it requires if you want to set up a VPN that also has measures of PCI compliance, which I imagine if you're building for fintech, you're going to want to have. And Eli can probably speak to this as well. Anything else before I move forward, Eli or JJ? Okay. Any chance to get both working and be PCI HIPAA compliant on one system? When you send Bubble, you lose the compliance. So I think WatchStack is speaking to what we were just saying. When you send the data, you lose compliance. And if you send it through the API connector, you're doing a proxy. But if you're sending directly to and from Xano servers, which again, you can do using a small snippet of JavaScript. And Chris and Michael, we should add a small piece of JavaScript, just like a basic one to send API calls back and forth to that doc. So we'll make sure that that's added during the week. But when you're sending data, Xano stores encrypts data at rest, meaning stored in the database. It also encrypts data in transit, meaning it's encrypted when you're sending it back and forth. So as long as you're just using Xano to send and receive that data, you are compliant. So I'm going to do this here. Does using Xano and Bubble together address Bubble's privacy limitations? So a lot of questions here about privacy and compliance. This is great, all great to hear. Yes, like to what I was mentioning before, this is why we say we can work really well together. Like GDPR compliant, you want to be GDPR compliant with Bubble, go ahead and host or get a Xano plan, deploy in Europe, and you're going to be fine, right? And you just have to keep in mind that data transmission piece of it, but that is how you get over the privacy limitations. Now, it's also important to note, GDPR, for example, is not just backend data and story information. It's also what you do within Bubble, what information you collect about the user, what you're storing in the cookies and stuff. So it's a comprehensive piece. You can't just like use Xano and just be like, I'm compliant. You have to go through, look at what the laws and regulations are, and look at your responsibilities in terms of how you store data, how you structure data, and what you do in the front end as well. All right, Nick says, didn't see it on the agenda. If there's time at the end, a quick word would be interesting on how difficult to streamline data migration is if an app starts in Bubble and eventually scales to where Xano is preferred for the non-enterprise plans. So I guess I'll answer this at a high level. It really depends on obviously your workflows and your data sets. But in that last slide, we talked about the different ways that you can think about moving data back and forth. This hybrid world where we would start with your complex workflow. If you're talking about database, moving your database things onto Xano, like I said, they have an export where you can export their the things in the data from Bubble and you can bring it into Xano. You're going to have to do a little bit of relationship mapping, but we've seen massive data sets. I'm talking like millions being done in a week. Now you're going to have to be focused on it, but we've seen it done before. So that's what you can expect. And it's hard to really know before actually seeing anything. But another thing that I'll mention is we also, the Xano team offers office hours every single week. And we have 2 sessions, and maybe Michael and Chris, you can put that in the Notion doc, just a link to our office hours. You can sign up. If you want to show us your data set and say like, hey, I'm thinking about this, that's something that we can kind of be more hands-on and help you with there. Brian says, does it make sense to switch to Xano if we are building a complex search page with many filters where we check for intersections between lists? So this is a tough question, but it depends on the nature of the search. If complex search means like OR groups, as JJ mentioned, OR groups and very complex queries are just difficult to do in Bubble, and they take more time to return the data. And we showed you that in the performance data. So I would say for any sort of search, fuzzy search, Bubble or Xano is built for that. Now, in terms of like the front end, obviously you're taking the inputs and the filters from the user, but feed that all to Xano in the back end, and you should be great. And it's also worth mentioning, we have a very generous free plan. You can check out the searching capabilities. Obviously, that you're not going to get the same performance because you are on a shared resource on the free plan, but it will give you a sense of the flexibility of the business logic we can do, and it's still pretty fast.
Yeah, let me get in on this one quick. I have built a lot of complex search pages with many filters. You know, and it works well within Bubble if you're using the same data type. And even if it's not the same data type, you can create a data type that is a combination of many different data types to one, so you can still leverage that. But it does take a bit of work, right? And I would say that I was able to build, you know, using, you know, Andrew's and Coachy No Code app, Scabby's method of, you know, building the, what is the filtering system called, Eli? Where you, for some reason I can't think of it. Daisy chain. Yeah, daisy chain filtering system within Bubble. And we were doing that on, you know, repeating groups that were loading 300,000 records, and it performed well, right? And so we could daisy change those filters to really allow our users to mix and match how they wanted to filter that. So I think that worked well. 300,000 records, and we had to combine a couple data types together to create that one data type that we searched for, that daisy chain. We also had a point where we had a hidden repeating group within a pop-up, and we were looking to, you know, intersect lists on that. That took a significant more time, and that was not ideal. Eventually, we ended up moving that list on to the data type that we were using, and that was a significant speed up. So depends on where you're at with your app, how many data entries you're searching, and the types of searches you need to make. I would say you could get really far within Bubble, but once you get past, you know, that certain data limitation of how many records you're searching, it probably makes sense to go Xano.
Awesome. This next question is for Eli. Curious in how you handle user management and data permissions. Do you keep your users in Bubble, or did you move them to Xano? How do we think about making that decision?
Yeah, so I think this, it makes a big difference on how much of your app's app you're going to be moving into Xano. We don't move them. We don't move the users into Xano. We maintain all user management, everything inside Bubble. And for most hybrid approaches, I think that's probably the right way to do it. Almost all of our integration is on the back end, app-based, app-wide activity. So we don't have a lot that's based around the user or the company, but we maintain the users in Bubble. And I think unless you're really going heavy, Xano heavy on your database, probably it's simpler to keep your user management in Bubble.
What about if you had two Bubble apps that you were using Xano to connect to, and you wanted similar auth for each Bubble app? Would you just look at more of a single sign-on, or would you go auth for Xano for that purpose?
Man, it just depends, right? Because you could auth the one Bubble app into the other Bubble app, right? You can still maintain user management inside a single Bubble app and authenticate from Bubble app number 2 with that first. So I really think it just the big question is how much of your data is going to be in Xano, and if most of the data that your users are interacting with is in Bubble, just keep users in Bubble.
Awesome. Moving on, how do you migrate data from Bubble to Xano? Are data types retained? So what we do is when you export from Bubble into a CSV and you import that CSV into Xano when you're creating your databases, we detect the data types. So if it's very obviously a number, then we're going to detect that it is an integer. But we should carry over, I think, 90% of it. I think there are some data types maybe in Bubble that are even, they're called something different. But Michael, I saw you unmuted. Any clarification on that?
Yeah, first note on the CSV import. So we do auto detect, but also at the time of import, you can go and double check everything and force a specific data type. So just keep that in mind if something gets missed. I know in Bubble, they have something called an option set, where you can define different values and use them across tables. We don't have exactly that. In Xano, we have something called enums, where you can define specific values, but we don't have a way to basically reuse those in other sections. So you just have to build those and define those values each time.
Awesome. Okay.
If I can just note there, those can be defined those are defined at the table level, not like on the endpoints, etc. Like it's defined at the table level.
Okay. Awesome. So
Thank you for clarifying.
I'm just going to actually just share, or I guess I can't. I was going to share my Q&A screen, but that's totally fine. Chase says, my main concern is how the process for transforming an already existing app to Xano, deciding which, if not all data sets should be moved over, how relationships are formed in Xano from existing data in Bubble, and how the option sets work. So this was just something that was brought up. So option sets, something that I know that we don't support yet. And that it is a cool feature in Bubble where it's basically an enum list. You define a list of things and then you can leverage it basically everywhere. We've gotten some feedback that that's something that would be cool in Xano. It is on our roadmap, but not anytime in the near future. So that's one thing that you would definitely lose, that ability to have. It's not that you can't do it in Bubble. It's just not as easy as the option set piece of it. In terms of which data should be moved over, it's a very, I guess, a nuanced question. It kind of depends on the nature of your application. We do have videos that show a mixed world where you're doing auth with Xano. We have a video showing third-party auth to Xano. So let's say you want to maintain your authentication in Bubble and then leverage Xano's secure endpoints. You can actually exchange like a token and basically have a world where you're authing in Bubble and retaining an auth endpoints or everything securely in Xano. So there's many different ways to do it. I would say for your case specifically, Chase, I would come to office hours and show us, and then we can help you think through it. Okay, Brian says, I often find myself pitching Bubble as a tool because of its single stop nature. Your team needs to learn one tool, pay one license fee, and manage access in one place. It's about simplifying tooling overhead. Very curious to hear about strategies for thinking about this in a hybrid Xano plus Bubble approach. So I'll start with this answer, and anyone else can chime in. I think it's a great point. Like, if at all possible, you should only use one tool, especially if it solves all your problems, right? So if Bubble, for example, does everything that you needed to do, please do not use Xano. Like, it really doesn't make any sense. I think where you have to start thinking about it is when you start when the need expands to larger data sets and you need to do more mission critical business logic, think about the world how you would think about this when you're like hiring developers or growing your team. That is cost that you have to add. But now you have a tool like Xano where you can do it yourself. So the overhead of, for example, paying $67 a month in addition to your Bubble professional or personal fee is going to be far less than the overhead that you would need to do to hire a developer or like spin up your own servers and things of that nature. So high level answer, do everything all in one tool if you can. If you need more, you just have to think about it in terms of like, now I only have to pay 67 instead of the thousands of dollars that it might have cost for me to do it myself or figure it out myself. Anyone else want to chime in on that before I move on to the next question?
No, I think it's very important that you made there that if you don't have to jump to Xano, don't, because it does add quite a bit of complication. It's not your fields aren't selectable like they are in Bubble. Like there's a lot more to setting it up. It's just super useful, but if Bubble serves your purposes, don't feel like you're not building properly by staying just in Bubble.
Yeah, don't switch just to say you switched, right? Make sure it makes sense to switch. And again, Bubble takes you really far. So, I think you'll start feeling when you should switch based on performance and speed and your data.
I think that's a really important point you're making. Like, I think a good rule of thumb is you should be feeling the pain first. And then when you're feeling the pain, then you're like, okay, I think it might be a good time for me to consider doing this. Now, some people want to build for scale, like in the perfect way right out of the gate. We would not recommend that, even though like, great, that's best practices. But the chances are if you're building an app or building a business, there's going to be iterations. And so the great thing about these tools is that you're able to build not only just your MVP and Bubble, feel that pain, but then you have a solution to overcome it, right? So I think that it's more important for you to just try to do everything in one place first, and then slowly start to move from there. Now, it's a different case if you know you're going to be using multiple front ends and you need a central data repository, then I would definitely start with a separate backend. But if you don't need that, then just use one tool.
Yeah, I think, shoot, forgot what I was going to say. Go for it. I forget.
Okay. If it comes back to you, you can chime in. Matthew says, can y'all please speak to sharing the backend between Bubble and Xano, i.e. some simple database objects, queries in Bubble, move more involved into Xano? Good idea or best to keep backend all in one tool? If shared, what are the best practices? So this is kind of like a central theme of what we've been saying. I think that if you are a Bubble first application, you don't need any other front ends. You should really only migrate the workflows that are painful for you, or as your data sets start to grow and you notice the performance around searches, complex searches are either not possible or just very slow, that's a good time to start thinking about moving those data sets to Xano. I think in general, and I think Eli would agree with this, being in a mixed environment, the more you can separate the data out from the user and not require like direct auth relationships, that's probably just going to be the easiest way to work. It is possible, 100%. But just think about it in that way. Like Xano is just like a workhorse in the background, just piping in data that is necessary. Eli, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it there. It's as you need it, as you feel the pain, and that pain may be large data set but it may be something simple like you really want to start logging what changes to everything that happens to different data types in your app. That's painful in Bubble. It's a very simple thing to do, but it's painful. So yeah, I think waiting on the pain, then start moving move over what will make you feel better.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say now. Remember, we're using Bubble. Like, one of the advantages of Bubble is to get to market as quick as possible and to either succeed or fail as quick as possible, right? So we don't want to add any kind of deterrents to that process. We need to just find product market fit as quick as possible. And as soon as we find more pain along that process, then we can look into solving that specific pain for that specific function. But until we get there, I would still recommend just go full-blown Bubble. Get your business to life as fast as possible. Let your users use it, because remember, this technology is all to solve use cases for solving your customers' needs, right? And how we could do that best is the most important part. But it requires you to get your application live so you can start doing that. And then once that happens, wherever you start feeling pain, then find the best solution for you. But again, focus on solving your business needs.
Awesome. Let's see. So next question, Kier says, could Xano be used for a SAML SSO OAuth to intranet login type function on Bubble with, say, Microsoft Azure directory? So technically, yes, especially when you get into our enterprise plan. But what I normally tell people is that it's not only a little complex to build, but there's two services like when you think about Auth0 and Okta, they live and breathe this. And so we have an Auth0 plugin because we're never going to be as good as them when it comes to Auth, SAML, SSO, et cetera. So a lot of enterprise organizations will use Xano alongside an Auth0 or a user auth provider, and that works really well together. And so I would say, yes, it can be done. Mostly, please use another provider like an Auth0 to get it done, though. Okay, when transitioning to a traditional development environment, programming environment, are you able to easily connect Xano to front-end frameworks like React, React Native, like a headless backend, or will it require drastic reconfiguration? Seems like all you need to do is utilize the endpoints available. Aram, you are 100% correct. We spit out RESTful JSON endpoints, and they're fully documented in Swagger using the Open API standard. So if you are using you're working with a front-end team or you're building in a front-end framework, everything is documented, it's ready to go. Everything that you do in Xano is automatically documented, and those endpoints are just ready to go. You can set off on them, or you can just make them public. So that is possible. Watchers Incubator asks, how does Bubble and Xano work together when dealing with real-time use cases, such as messaging or constantly updating and repeating groups? Or would that fall under the hybrid method you mentioned? And would it be recommended to keep that part in Bubble? So I'll answer one piece of this, and then I'm going to pass it to JJ and Eli. In terms of real time, I'm assuming you're talking about like immediately showing an update that you make in a database. So we usually use, Xano is usually coupled with Ably or Pusher. Those are two WebSocket services that do an amazing job at pushing real-time events. And companies like Uber use them to show the car on the map or just like display real-time data. So you are able to enable real-time in Xano and then push to whatever front end you want. Now, in terms of how that's displayed, like as a repeating group on the page, I know there's some like trickery to make sure that it updates immediately. I guess, JJ, why don't we start with you if you have any answers to that, and then maybe because I know Eli might have something too.
I think Eli would be best for this.
Yeah, this is a fun one. There's some hackery you can do with the API connector to make this happen, but I think it's probably an issue that we need to figure out a good solution for. If you use an API connector, one of the issues is that Bubble caches the previous response from that API connector, and so unless something changes in your request to pull the new data, you're just going to get served the same data you got the last time you made that request. So what you can do there, and I have a video on it, maybe I can pull the link and drop it in the chat, but you can just add a parameter into the API connector call that you update with the current date, extract the Unix timestamp or something, just so you have something different in that call, and Bubble's like, hey, there's something new, let's get new data. It's not optimal, but it does work. But I think this is probably an issue that hopefully we can figure out some way of making this work in a simple way with Bubble.
Awesome. Yeah, that's hold on one second. My Q&A thing went away real quick. Okay, anyways, yeah, thank you for that. Eli, if you want to post that link in the chat, we'll go ahead and put it in the link so everyone has access to it. Shout out to Vincent. Hello, Vincent from No Code Family. Nice to see you as always, and thank you all for being here. All right, so let's move on here. Eddie is saying, how is Xano for powering the back end of an SEO independent website, a blog, for example, or a current directory like Capterra? Xano outputs JSON instead of HTML, but the server rendering HTML is so much better than SEO from what I understand. So Xano, good for SEO or not so much? So this is a complex question to answer. So if the answer is always it depends, and that I hate that answer, but this is what it means. If you are displaying your data on the page just raw, right? Like you're taking the JSON result from Xano and displaying it on the page, then yes, it's not great for SEO. And that's the same for any backend that you're feeding the data into. Now, the cool thing is that depending on the front end, and I don't know the nuances around Bubble, but I certainly know JavaScript frameworks support this, you basically pre-render or render an HTML version of the server request that then gets crawled and searched by Google, by DuckDuckGo, by all the different search engines. And so we, for example, at Xano.com, we serve from Xano to we have an Angular 13 application that pre-renders all the pages. So everything, all the different landing pages can be indexed by Google. So it is 100% possible. I don't know how that works in Bubble. JJ, Eli, I'm not sure if you can comment on that from an SEO perspective, but that's I know on the Bubble, on the Xano end, that's how it's done.
I am not an SEO expert. I won't comment.
Yeah, I wasn't following much of that, so I'm not up to speed. But
dude, you work for an SEO product, man.
What was the question?
The question was basically like, when you're serving data from like any API, could be Xano, it's not typically indexed by the search engines, right? And it's not good for SEO. And what I was saying is that there's a way on the front end, and this is what we do on our website, to pre-index or build an HTML version that gets indexed by Google, right? Or any web crawler. I'm not sure how you do that in Bubble, but I'm assuming it's possible.
Yeah, Bubble does it automatically for you. So we're essentially building single page applications, right? So we have a profile page, but they'll index all of those pages for you, like rendering them out and submit that to Google. There's also external services such as like pre-render that you could use as well to do that for you. But Bubble handles that automatically, which is really nice. So yeah.
Awesome. Matt asks, is there something fundamental about how Bubble's built that has caused it to be slow? And just for everyone, I'm going to stick around for a little bit longer and ask questions, but we're technically at time, so you don't have to stick around. I'm having fun doing this, so it's no problem at all. Is there something fundamental about how Bubble's built that causes it to be slow? And we should expect it to be slow for many years to come. This is, I think, because Bubble was such an innovator in the beginning. They basically built a piece of software and focused on the tools and the innovation on the front end. What does this mean? This means that the innovation really that Bubble has given you is the canvas, the different components, and they just started layering on capabilities. When this happens, the backend unfortunately suffers. You are in a multi-tenant environment, right? Sharing your resources with lots of people. So naturally, once you start getting into these harder and larger workflows, the focus on making that performant from the beginning has been difficult. So I would say, Matt, if you are going to be working with large data sets, you have two options. Don't, most of Bubble's self-serve plans are not going to give you the performance you need. You need to sign up for a dedicated Bubble plan. Like I mentioned, with starts, I think at 1,500, and it depends. You can layer on region and a lot of different things. So if you want to stay completely in the Bubble ecosystem, that's where you're going to go. Or you can use a tool like Xano to increase that performance. So one thing I do know about Bubble is they just think about that whole pricing change thing. Look how much they listened to the community and they really wanted to hear what you were saying and make it better. I firmly believe that Bubble always tries to kind of listen and do the right thing and to improve. So they are going to be making things faster, but there's a fundamental way that Bubble was built from the ground up so many years ago. It's like a decade old at this point. That just makes it a little harder for them to be performant. We're newer. We started from the ground up wanting to be performant. So that's what we focus on. So I hope that answers your question. JJ, go for it.
Yes, I think I got a lot more insight into this one. So Bubble is constantly improving, right? Like they push updates at this point, like a weekly basis, right? So that's awesome. They've also made a significant investment into the tech stack and servers that this year that has also allowed them to make a lot more advancement. And I think just in general, their team right now is so bottlenecked with, limited staff based on their growth, right? So we'll continue to see significant advancements as they start to, grow and take form, right? With that being said, enterprise users are not their main user, right? Their main user are non-technical founders that want to build applications that don't deal with large data sets, right? And for the most part, they're nailing that, and that's where they're highly focused, right? So when we think about the enterprise, the dedicated user, we're still a very small subset within the Bubble community. And so they're just not building for us yet. They're taking small strides to do that, like with the version control feature that I've been helping them build for the last several months. That's a really good step towards team collaboration in that enterprise format, right? But we're just still not that main customer, right? And so I've used large data sets on Bubble. We've had a dedicated app on Bubble. I still wouldn't even recommend it, honestly. If you're using large data sets, need to transform, query, delete large data sets, I would go to Xano at this point. Bubble does amazing and so many things, but large data sets specifically, I think they still have a lot of catching up to do. And I think it's going to take some time for them, right? For all the reasons that I just listed. So I think I'll end it there and let us know if you have any other questions.
If I can jump in on that real quick. I'm not sure if he's talking about slowness on the drawing of the elements, but they are moving to server-side rendering of the HTML and CSS, which is already making a big difference in that performance. Because a lot of what I have noticed is that, and I've seen multiple apps where from the front end it would appear as though it's a slow search, and it's actually the drawing of the elements on the page, because there was like every repeating group, right? There's 30 elements inside there, and so you multiply that by 30 rows, and it's trying to do this on page load, and so just by streamlining that, by moving to Flex, and now with actually moving to what seems to be they're moving to style sheets versus inline styles. I think we're going to see a big update and an upgrade on that in the next half a year as far as speed, because oftentimes it's not even the database search that's causing those slowdowns.
Awesome. And yeah, I think that addresses Pedro's question there. So I'm going to move on to anonymous attendee. Really like the ways it could be useful. Wondering what are the limitations you face in Bubble when using an external database? What actions and workflows you cannot leverage? I would probably let you answer this, Eli. Have you come across anything that you haven't been able to do yet?
I don't think I've come across anything that couldn't be done. I've come across lots of things that were just really slow to do. And it's almost entirely when it comes to actually taking data in, manipulating it, and trying to trying to save multiple data types or just process complex data structure. So I don't know that I've come across anything especially well. And if you do, you can always, there's always the ability to build a plugin and process the data that way. But even in native Bubble, I don't know that I've ever come across anything I couldn't do, just it might be really inefficient.
Awesome. Tasks asks, what are 3 common mistakes Xano beginner users make? 3 common mistakes. This is well, Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Chris is a newest member on the Xano team in customer success, and not only is he a newer Xano user, but he helps our newer Xano user. So, what would you say the answer to this is, Chris?
When I saw this question come up, the first thing that popped into my head is a lot of times I see that when a Xano user is building a loop, so when you set up a loop, you specify to that loop, okay, where is this big set of data that I need to iterate through? That's stored in a variable. And then what the loop does is the loop goes through each one of those and temporarily stores one of those items in another variable to actually work with inside the loop's logic. And what I tend to see is a lot of users will take the variable that contains all of their records and try to modify that inside of their loop instead of using the variable that the loop uses for those single items. So that's a really big one that I see a lot. Another one I would say is probably just building overly complex logic, which I know can be really difficult to kind of know if you're doing that or not. But for example, I saw there was a user recently who was querying all the records in a table and then using a loop to pull out a single record from that result, where it may make sense if one day they have multiple records that would match that condition or something, just depending on what they want to do with it. You could do all that in one step. Little things like that. It's really just more about getting familiar with the project in general. And then I would say the third thing is not subscribing to our YouTube channel.
Awesome. Yeah,
lots of good stuff over there.
And if I can chime in too and give my 2 cents, I think, and this is just a natural thing, but we see a lot of people who want to be absolutely perfect from the get-go. And the reality is, and it's not just with Xano, I think it's with development in general, whether that's no code or programming, or when you're really building anything, you're not going to be perfect right out the gate, and that's okay. And you got to be okay with being able to fail, make mistakes, learn from them, iterate over them, and improve. And that's really how you learn, and you get over that learning curve quicker. And it's going to make your app better in the long run, because you will have gone through those pitfalls, overcome them, realize how that might affect your users, your app, and build it in a more proficient way as you go.
Yeah, 100%. And of course, I would just reiterate here, as you're working in Xano, down in the lower left-hand corner, there's a little question mark button. You can click that and you can get connected right away to support chat. It's usually either me or Michael in there answering questions. So whether you have a specific issue you're trying to work through, or if you just maybe want a second set of eyes for a second to say, hey, is this the best way that I can go about doing this? Please reach out as much as you need to. And then we also have our weekly office hour sessions, which are super great for things like that.
Neil, you're being ridiculous, my friend.
Yes, he is.
Neil's my favorite.
Here we go. Assume the auto binding feature would be lost with a Xano backend. I don't know about auto binding. Eli or JJ, is this something that you can speak to?
Yeah, that's a Bubble feature where it just automatically updates the field as you type in the input. So you would lose that.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. That is a nice little feature.
So was you type
The
in
input is changed, it'll work.
It's like is it autocomplete, basically?
No, so if you have, essentially takes away the need to save your data. As you type through your input, it automatically makes the updates in the database.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that would be nice. Hopefully, Bubble, if you're watching this, reach out. We'd love a deeper integration so we can enable that.
Rah.
All All right, Emilio, not sure if you have reviewed Palantir's model. I'm not exactly sure what that means. Emilio, do you want to like here? If I allow you to, I just allowed you to talk. Do you want to speak to it real quick?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, yes. How you guys doing? Hey, by the way, great job, you guys. You guys doing, I mean, since I started working with Xano, my gosh, data is so much funner now.
Awesome.
Related to Palantir is in our company, we use Palantir for data security. And from the data security side, they bring data from different enterprise areas, bring it into one place, and then secure that data. And then what they've done is they created software outside of that to manipulate the data, to form it for reporting and those kind of things. I see Xano kind of similar to that. So what I'm thinking of Xano for the future for me is that kind of integration where, so maybe my question is, enterprise applications outside coming into Xano, we could secure that information in there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of what, I mean, we're used a lot for like no code ETL or ELT, which is basically you are extracting from a external data source or a data lake, bringing it into Xano, transforming in the way that you want, securing, and then pushing it back out to data to front ends in a secure way. Broadly speaking, I think people use us for that all the time. And we even use that for ourselves. So definitely possible. That whole transformation game is something that we really, I think, shine at, and obviously storing data securely as well. Does that answer your question? Yes.
And the reason I'm asking this is I work with a friend of mine, and he might start an organization in a big company where I already told him I want to use Xano, and I'm using Bubble as a front end for him to be able to do that. So I might be getting with you guys in a few months if that works out to see if we could do that for this particular company. It's a bigger company.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you, Emilio. And thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it. Okay, so I am going to keep going. And by the way, for the people that are left, it'd be kind of a fun exercise. What's a good like Bubble Xano name, like combined together? Like I know there's like the WAMZ stack. Is there like a Bano? Or is there something like, I put your suggestions in the chat. I'd be interested in that. Okay, so another Emilio question related to the data part yes, we just answered. So then, Eddie, does Bubble's front end suffer scalability wise in the same way that its backend does? I think the answer to this, I'll speak to it, and then maybe JJ, Eli can chime in. The front end it's far less of an issue because you aren't doing any intensive operations on the front end. Now, sometimes, for example, if there is business logic that is being calculated on the front end, and sometimes I think like JJ was mentioning, like fuzzy search happens on the front end, that calculation is done on the front end. You don't want to do that. That's not scalable. You want to push that back to a background process or a back end to handle. So that's the only time it wouldn't kind of be scalable or something you need to worry about. Now, obviously, as you grow in traffic, you need to think about the performance of like the images that you have. Are you like making users download a lot every time they look at the page? How's that going to happen once you have like thousands of users visiting your site at the same time? Those are the things you're going to have to think about. JJ, Eli, anything to add to that? Okay, awesome. Adrian says, so I guess database triggers would be lost too. I'm assuming so. I'm assuming there's a feature in Bubble that triggers something when a database event happens. Yeah, yeah, you would lose that. You could do something similar with Xano using our function stack, especially if you want real time, you do ably and pusher. But native database triggers would be lost. Again, Bubble, reach out to us. We can work on that together. Okay, final question. Do you have any Fortune 1000-ish success stories that can be shared publicly? I can tell you that we have, well, I mean, Qualtrics uses us. They've like publicly posted testimonials, so I would say they're one of them, but there are other clients that I'm not sure that I can share, or I know has posted publicly that I can't, but like, yes, there definitely are. But what's really interesting is that these large organizations, even though they're like large organizations, it doesn't mean that they're working with large data or doing anything crazy, right? So it's just that happens that they like, there's a citizen developer like one of you at a large organization that's building like a small scale application. But there are a lot of use cases where people are starting to, and this is the wonderful thing about the no code landscape. Like more and more organizations are turning to no code. And I think this is why it's so important that, you know, people like JJ and Eli and some of the other people in the chat here are building more awareness around the no code stack that can accomplish enterprise grade needs, right? And so it may not be Xano, it may be some other tool, right? Like there's so many different kind of, I guess, the third generation no code tooling or enhancements that allow you to build anything that you want. So, so very, very cool stuff. That is, oh, let's see, Nick, who has an enterprise pitch deck? It's not an easy sale outside of user reach. Wait, what? Who has an enterprise pitch deck? It's not an easy sale outside of a user research tool. Oh, I see. To sell into the enterprise. That's what you're saying. So typically, when you are selling into an enterprise, you're going to have two types of gatekeepers. They're like a CIO or CSO level. One gatekeeper is going to say, I don't care if no code can like build unicorns and spit out sprinkles on the screen. I will, like, it doesn't matter what you say. You're never gonna fly. So selling into that type of enterprise, unfortunately, is a losing battle. We've tried it. But then you have, and I think you see this more often, more enterprise people, especially that are suffering from the labor supply shortages of developers that are like, look, we need the people in the organization to build their own software. We can't get involved anymore. We just don't have the capacity. Those are the ones that are the ones that you can convince. So I think you do two things. One is you show them what's possible in terms of building with Bubble. You can build everything that you possibly need in Bubble, right? From visually. Then it's going to come down to like, oh, wait a second, but how does this scale? How does the data transform? Is it secure? I want to manage it on my own cloud. And am I able to do that? And that's where Xano comes in, because Xano can do all of those things. And so if the engineer is intellectually honest with themselves, we have never lost a battle if they're able to do that, because they ask all these questions and the answer is yes to all of them because we built it that way. Like I said, our co-founder, lead DevOps on Google Photos, he was there at the inception of Kubernetes, right? So it's like we are building with best practices in mind. And so that's how I would approach it. But again, it has to be that second category of CSO, CIO, or gatekeeper at an enterprise. I think that's great. I'm going to give JJ and Eli the last word to wrap up. This has been a great session. I think very informative. Really appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this with you all. Thank you everyone so much for coming. JJ, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. Again, appreciate the Xano team for putting this together. Looking to do more of these things in the future. So if you have suggestions on topics that you'd like to be covered, reach out to me on Twitter, DM me, and we'll talk about it. If you're not in my Bubble group already, reach out to me and we'll talk about that as well. We're looking to build that group for anybody at the intermediate to senior level that's trying to push no code further, trying to kind of, curate that so it's like minds together there. But otherwise, appreciate all of you for joining. Appreciate the Xano team and Eli for taking the time.
Awesome. Eli, I'll give you the last.
Yeah, it's the same. Fantastic. Thanks for coming, and keep building.
Keep building.
And we're here for you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.